You won't believe what happened next. A man who once looked indestructible, who turned pain into power and doubt into fuel, woke up one morning to a quiet metronome inside his chest. Not a drumline from the gym, not the roar of a crowd, a tiny device pulsing out the seconds, and that's when it hits you. Even the strongest legends eventually meet a storm they can't outlift. Today we're talking about Arnold Schwarzenegger, not the poster on your wall or the catchphrases you can quote in your sleep, but the human being who kept getting up when life threw the hardest punches. If grit had a face, it would look a lot like his. Ready? Let's go! He didn't start as a headline. He started as a kid in a small village where winters bit through the walls and praise was rare enough to feel mythical. Home was strict, quiet. You didn't earn attention, you clawed for it. So a boy named Arnold Schwarzenegger found a dim cellar, a flickering bulb, and some scrap metal weights, and he began forging a message to the world no one else could write for him. I will be seen. Down there, the floor was cold, the air smelled like dust and rust, and the only applause came from iron hitting concrete. But that was enough. Every rep said, I exist. Every set screamed, watch me. He taped photos of champions above the bed, not for vanity, but for escape. Those bodies weren't just carved. They looked free. Free from small rooms and smaller expectations, free from the feeling that you didn't matter unless you were perfect. The idea that strength could be built, by hand, by will, by hours, became his lifeline. When he discovered a gym miles away, he'd ride a bike for what felt like forever, legs burning, wind slicing his face, returning in the dark. People called it obsession. He called it survival. Obsession is a dirty word until the results show up, then it's called vision. At 21, Arnold Schwarzenegger stepped onto a plane with a suitcase that rattled more than it zipped, and an accent so heavy it turned every conversation into a puzzle. He landed in America with a map only he could see. By day he lifted bricks. By night he lifted iron. Some evenings he'd lie on a lumpy mattress, staring at a cracked ceiling and wonder if he'd picked the wrong dream. Maybe any normal person would have quit. But he'd never been normal. While the world dismissed bodybuilding as a sideshow, he trained like his passport depended on it, because to him, it kind of did. If he stopped winning, he thought he might disappear. Then the titles came. He stacked trophies until they looked like a staircase. And truthfully, the higher he climbed, the heavier each step felt. Winning isn't a finish line, it's a contract. Keep going or lose everything you just earned. He pushed past injuries that would bench most athletes, torn muscles, angry tendons, joints that sounded like gravel. The pain didn't ask permission, it just moved in. He iced. He rapped. He kept going. That was the pattern, the rhythm, because if he paused, the silence got loud. Hollywood noticed. Not at first with open arms, more like raised eyebrows. The accent, too thick. The name, too long. The body, too much. But rejection is just fuel if you decide it is. He studied, adapted, made the outlier his signature. When a certain sci-fi juggernaut hit, everything changed. The voice they mocked, iconic. The presence they called too big, unforgettable. He kicked open a new door, again, and he learned something about fame. The bright lights are warm, but they cast shadows. One lukewarm opening weekend cut deeper than a boo. One off year felt like freefall. The higher the pedestal, the more you feel the wobble. Then he did the most terrifying thing successful people can do. He reinvented himself. He stepped off safe ground and into the chaos of public service. Politics didn't care about his box office numbers. They wanted answers, leadership, decisions. He traded costumes for suits, film sets for crises. He made mistakes. He learned in real time while the whole world watched. And still he kept moving forward because that's what he'd trained himself to do when the room went quiet. Move. But the body that carried him through all those storms eventually sent an invoice. In middle age, doctors told Arnold Schwarzenegger he needed a fix in the engine room, a valve that never worked quite right. Hospitals have a different kind of fluorescent light, the kind that makes anyone feel small. He didn't broadcast it. He didn't want pity, didn't want to burden family far away with fear they could do nothing about. The scar healed, more or less. The truth it carved into him didn't. He walked out not as a machine, but as a man who understood his limits were real. Years later, another surgery, then another. Each time the curtain pulled back on the same stage. Monitors, alarms, a body he'd once commanded now lying still while strangers did the driving. Imagine waking, unable to speak, and hearing that plan A didn't work. Imagine needing help to breathe when your whole identity was built on control. He did what he'd always done. He listened, adapted, trained for the new reality. And in the spring, a few birthdays back, when doctors said scar tissue was scrambling his heartbeat, they proposed a small device to keep time, a pacemaker. For most people, a lifeline. For him, a sentence to make peace with. I used to be the machine, he thought. Now I rely on one. Less than a week later, he stood at a podium, suit pressed, humor intact, talking about clean air and a cleaner future, not as a symbol of invincibility, as proof you can keep showing up with stitches still fresh. But life's most brutal cuts don't always come from scalpels. Some arrive slowly, silently, stealing a person you love one memory at a time. Sergeant Shriver, the father-in-law who helped shape Arnold Schwarzenegger's compass, statesman, servant, giant, began losing names, then recent stories, then faces. If you've lived through that with someone, you know the cruel magic trick of it. Their body is still here. The person you knew slips away. The day a once towering man looked at him and asked, "Who are you?" Something in Arnold broke. He had faced pain he could outwork. This wasn't that. This was a mirror. What if I forget myself someday? He started treating his brain like his biceps, training it daily, feeding it better, guarding it fiercely. Not to live forever, but to live aware for as long as possible. When Sergeant Shriver passed, Arnold Schwarzenegger spoke with grace at the service and sat quietly afterward, staring at an empty chair and making a promise nobody else heard: use your time well. And then came a storm he couldn't blame on fate. A secret he'd carried for years stepped into daylight, and it hurt the people he loved most. In the late 90s, he fathered a child with Mildred Bana, a longtime member of his household. Around the same time, Maria Shriver gave birth to their youngest, 2 babies born weeks apart. One celebrated, one kept hidden. If you're imagining the private pain of that house, the confusion, the suspicion, the fear, you're probably still underestimating it. Eventually, the resemblance grew too obvious to ignore. Maria Shriver confronted the truth. He admitted everything. No theatrics, no excuses, just consequence. The headlines pounced. That's what headlines do. But beneath that noise were 5 kids trying to understand their family all over again. Catherine, Christina, Patrick, Christopher, and Joseph Bana, a teenager suddenly dragged into a spotlight he didn't ask for. Maria Shriver handled it with a grace that stunned people who think grace is easy. She stepped back. She protected her children. She chose healing over spectacle. Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't go on a tour to beg for forgiveness. He didn't try to spin this into a public lesson about adversity. He did the only thing that made sense to him. He took responsibility and showed up, again and again. He built a relationship with Joseph Bana brick by brick, rep by rep, conversation by conversation. He stayed present for his other 4, without insisting on instant closeness or pretending time hadn't been split in 2. Repair isn't a speech. It's years. In the background, he went back to work, more carefully, with a different hunger. Roles mattered for what they said, not what they earned. He poured time and resources into causes that felt like duty: clean energy, veterans support, public fitness, education, Alzheimer's research in honor of Sergeant Shriver. He funded spaces where kids in tough neighborhoods could move their bodies and remember they matter, the same way he once did under a single bulb. He didn't need applause for that. He'd had enough applause for one lifetime. And what about the myth of the mansion and the machines? Yes, there's a quiet hillside home with room for kids and grandkids and the occasional chaos of dogs. Yes, there are symbols of a long career parked in the garage and memories from another era tucked into corners. The kind of artifacts that tell stories without saying a word. Now and then, he'll catch a sunrise from the patio and think about a different horizon when the ocean he dreamed of was made of magazine pages taped above a bed. The vehicles mean less than the mornings. Ownership means less than time. His days now run on discipline without ego. He still trains, but with precision over punishment. He stops before pain writes the plan. He eats like someone who knows the heart is a muscle and a messenger. He meditates, not to become untouchable, but to let the world land without breaking him. He laughs easily. He shares what's working for him with anyone who asks, especially men his age who feel written off by the culture. If he used to measure himself by plates on a bar, he measures himself now by presence. How often he's actually there for the people he loves. He never remarried after he and Maria Shriver separated. He speaks about her with respect as the mother of their children and the co-architect of a life they built and then had to bravely rebuild apart. For more than a decade, his partner has been Heather Milligan, a clinician whose day job is helping bodies heal. Their life is steady, simple, built on being good to each other without making it a parade. And the kids? Catherine swings by with little ones who treat the living room like a racetrack. Patrick juggles creative work and business. Christina carves her own path away from the megaphone. Christopher keeps it grounded and real. Joseph Bina, once the person in the margins, trains with his father, laughs with him, and stands shoulder to shoulder as a man, not a headline. Family pictures these days look like what they are: imperfect, full, honest. Money? He has plenty. He made it the way he made everything else. Early bets? Insane discipline. Boring consistency. Not overnight. He learned brick by brick, literally, back when he and Franco Columbu hauled wheelbarrows under the sun and turned sweat into opportunity. Real estate, when everyone else thought only about short-term glory. Small businesses that taught big lessons. A sports festival that outlived trends. Ventures that hit, others that didn't, all of them adding up to a life he didn't have to work for anymore, but still wanted to. The number is impressive. The point is the method. Write it down, work it daily, wait long enough for compounding to do its quiet magic. And he's still here, late 70s, waking up, grateful. Some mornings he palms his chest without thinking, feeling that steady tick reminding him that time is a partner and a limit. He bikes through the neighborhood before most alarms go off. He drops in on a school gym opening and surprises a kid who will remember it forever. He sits at a graduation like any proud dad, trying not to smile so big that it becomes a meme. If strength used to be how hard he could push, strength now is how gently he can show up. There's a crucial pivot in his story that matters more than any trophy. Reinvention wasn't surrender. Reinvention is strategy. He didn't stop being tough, he got wise. That's what late life can teach you if you let it. You learn the difference between proving something and living something. The applause fades. The work remains. The work of being a good father, a good partner, a decent neighbor, a citizen who leaves the place a little better than he found it. Maybe the most important thing Arnold Schwarzenegger teaches isn't how to lift or how to act or how to win an election. It's how to keep going after you break your own heart. How to look the people you hurt in the eye and say, I did this, and then spend years proving you meant the apology. How to sit with fear of surgeries, of memory loss, of losing what made you you, and decide to live fully anyway. That's the version of greatness we don't celebrate enough, the quiet kind that doesn't trend but transforms you. If you've ever felt unseen, remember that boy in the cellar who turned the clang of metal into a declaration. If you've ever felt like your accent, literal or metaphorical, made you impossible to understand, think about the young immigrant who spoke through actions until the world learned his language. If you've ever carried a secret that scorched the people you love, look at the years he spent planting in the ashes. Apologies, consistency, the boring, everyday proof that people can change. Not overnight, not perfectly, but enough to matter. And if you've ever wondered when to stop, here's a thought he'd co-sign. Stop when stopping keeps you here longer. Be ruthless about longevity. Put down the ego weight. Pick up the habits that keep you present. Call the person you've been meaning to call. Take the walk. Eat the thing that loves you back. Learn something new, even if it's humbling, especially if it's humbling. So what do we take from the Odyssey of Arnold Schwarzenegger? That greatness isn't a lightning strike. It's a decision repeated so often it becomes your nature. It's the choice to keep moving when staying would be easier, to keep caring when cynicism would be safer, to keep showing up when the applause is gone. You don't have to be on a stage to live like that. You just have to be awake to your own life. Now, if any part of this hit a nerve, if the kid in the basement, the immigrant on the construction site, the father at the hospital, or the man rebuilding trust felt like a mirror, carry that with you today. Do one small thing that your future self would point to and say, that's where the turn began. And hey, if you want more stories told straight from the heart, no fluff, just the real stuff that makes us better, tap like, drop a comment with the moment that stuck with you, and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Your support tells the algorithm and honestly tells me, keep going, because the story doesn't end when the spotlight dims. It keeps breathing in the quiet, one steady beat at a time.